Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Gary Smith, and I direct the Center for Injury Research and Policy at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm also a member of the two organizations that are co-hosting today's webinar, Prevent Child Injury and the Midwest Injury Prevention Alliance. So on behalf of these organizations, it's my pleasure to introduce Nancy Cowles, who's the Executive Director of Kids in Danger, who will moderate today's webinar. I just want to say a couple words about Nancy. Nancy has more than 30 years of experience conceiving, building, and directing organizations to investigate a wide variety of consumer issues to craft solutions. She's an international leader in advocacy and policy for prevention of child injury, in particular related to consumer products. And so whether it's window blind cords or laundry detergent packets, product recalls, furniture tip-overs, or a score of other important child safety issues, including the passage of Danny's Law and the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act in 2008. You're going to find Nancy's fingerprints all over all of those things. So Nancy, it's an honor to have you moderating today's session, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Gary, thank you so much. We're so pleased to be here to talk about this important issue. Welcome to everyone who's viewing. And I want to again thank Prevent Child Injury and Midwest Injury Prevention Alliance for holding this. Gary was a little modest. Both organizations he's not only a member of, but they were his brainchild and kind of helped found them from scratch. So thank you so much, Gary, for your leadership in many of these issues. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us all to learn more about furniture tip-overs and how we can all work together to reduce the hazard and keep our children safe. We aren't going to have any slides today, but I encourage everyone listening to visit each of our websites for vital information and background on furniture tip-over, prevention and advocacy efforts. We'll add links into the chat as we go along. Today we will hear from Janet McGee with the Lifted and Parents Against Tip-Overs, Will Wallace, Manager of Safety Policy at Consumer Reports, and Jonathan Midgett. He's the Consumer Ombudsman at the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC as we'll refer to it throughout this conversation. We'll hear from each panelist briefly to lay out the issues and then move on to questions from me and from you, the audience. You can put your questions into the chat or the Q&A tab. If you participated in the Twitter chat earlier this week hosted by Prevent Child Injury, some of this information will sound familiar. Dozens of children die each year from tip-overs, and thousands are rushed to emergency rooms with injuries. Tip-overs can be dressers and other clothing storage furniture, bookshelves and appliances such as ovens. TVs are often involved, either alone or when on top of a tipping dresser or other furniture. We just got new data this morning from the Consumer Product Safety Commission that Jonathan will cover later in his remarks. We're going to start where the issue of furniture instability too often ends up, with a family suffering from the unthinkable. In this case, Janet McGee has made it her mission to address the issue head-on so other families don't suffer the same tragedy, and to work tirelessly to support families through their connections at Parents Against Tip-Overs. Janet?
Thank you, Nancy. And I'll echo Gary and Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Nancy said, I'm Janet McGee. I'm the Director of Parents Against Tip-Overs, and I'm an accidental advocate because I didn't go to college to learn how to be an advocate for furniture tip-over prevention, but here I am today with you. In 2016 on Valentine's Day, so almost 6 years ago, my 22-month-old son, Ted, died when the dresser in his bedroom fell on him in our Minnesota home. I had put him down for a nap, and I was checking on him frequently. The last time I went to check on him, I noticed immediately that his dresser had fallen forward, and in that instant, I became very aware of how eerily quiet it was, and I just knew he had to be under it. So I picked up the dresser. It was very heavy, picked it up, started digging through what was then a pile of drawers and clothes, only to find Teddy at the bottom of the pile, purple and non-responsive. To make a long and very painful story short, Ted died at the hospital about 4 hours later. And what I couldn't understand was at first, I just thought this was an isolated incident. I had never heard of a tip over before. I had never heard that it had happened to another child, let alone hundreds of children. And I didn't understand why I didn't hear anything. We lived in a 1,500 square foot house at the time. Ted didn't scream for help. I found out later that often children are crushed by this big unit on top of them or stuck inside of a drawer that puts them in a position where they're just unable to scream for help. And I also learned that in many cases, a dresser can actually, the noise of it falling can be absorbed by their little bodies. And so it's not uncommon for parents to say, I didn't even hear anything happen. And so the reality is that Ted likely lost consciousness very quickly while the rest of our family just went about our normal Sunday afternoon. It's really every parent's worst nightmare to know that your child is in danger too late, but to also know that it happened under your watch in the safety of your own home. And so that's why I'm here today, because I have tried to make it my mission to be a voice to this, to share what happened to us in the hopes that it can prevent it from happening to another little child and another family suffering the same trauma. In 2017, about a year after Ted died, I formed my company called The Lifted, short for The Life of Ted, which is an advocacy company here in Minnesota. We promote tip over awareness locally. And in 2018, after finding many other parents from across the nation that have lost their children to tip overs, we formed a national parent coalition called Parents Against Tip Overs, or PAT as we call ourselves. And PAT is this wonderful group of parents that allows us to have a more unified voice at a national level rather than our unilateral voices sprinkled across the nation in our own little states. So I think PAT has accomplished a lot in the past 5 years, but as you'll probably hear throughout this webinar, we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Janet, for sharing the story. I know it never gets easier, and we really appreciate how much you're willing to suffer really again and again to keep other children safe. Consumer Reports needs no introduction to most Americans. They're well known for their savvy advice on consumer purchasing, services, and value. But their role in improving the safety of those products and services might be lesser known. Will and his team work on a wide variety of consumer product safety issues, but have taken a critical lead role in furniture tip over. Will?
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. It's really good to be with you here today, including my co-panelists and Dr. Smith. Consumer Reports is a nonprofit, independent, nonpartisan organization. We are science-based and data-driven, and we wear a lot of hats. We have a lot of different parts to the organization. We test products, we survey the public, we do investigative journalism, and we do advocacy, as Nancy mentioned. A lot of people don't realize that we have an advocacy office and that every single day we're working for policies and corporate practices that build a safer marketplace for everybody, and especially for the most vulnerable among us, children. So Consumer Reports has been working on furniture tip over issues for a number of years now. It's our honor every single day, every single week to work alongside Kids in Danger, Parents Against Tip Overs, and a number of other groups in this space. We've done 3 different rounds of dresser tip over testing over the years since 2018. We've done a number of investigative pieces about tip overs and about what the origins are of all of the deaths, injuries, the terrible toll that we see today. We've also documented the progress, or unfortunately lack thereof, over the years when it comes to building more stable dressers in the first place. We've found that the public is very interested in seeing strong rules for products that they buy for their homes. In fact, they expect it. They expect there to be a mandatory safety standard for products that they buy for their homes. And we've also seen them, we've talked to consumers, our members, and others who consider it really important that this be taken care of without them having to worry about it, without them having to carry the burden beyond all the other burdens that they carry in their daily lives, to also worry about hidden hazards in their home. And so, you know, I'm honored to be here today alongside everybody else on the panel. You know, CR does a lot of different work. We wear a lot of different hats. We've looked at this issue from a number of different angles. Today, we're focusing primarily on policy and what we can do in the policy and advocacy space to take furniture tip overs and make sure that no family ever has to suffer again from the loss of a child. And so I look forward to the discussion and look forward to discussing both policy actions on the legislative side and also what the CPSC has been working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Will, for that. Jonathan Midgett has had many roles at CPSC. We have worked together for decades together, Jonathan. He currently holds the newly created role of Consumer Ombudsman, and where all that experience comes together to help consumers navigate the agency and helps the agency to be more responsive to consumers. Jonathan?
Thanks, Nancy. The Consumer Ombudsman role is a real honor to be the first person in that role for the agency. My job now is to help bring the consumer perspective to the agency and the agency perspective to consumers. What that means is I spend a lot of my time explaining the rationale behind how the procedures work in a federal government agency like the CPSC. I answer questions from consumers all the time about hazards, about processes for making comments on ongoing regulatory actions, explanations about who they should talk to find out more about a particular product safety concern. And I want to highlight how important it is to get feedback from consumers for the agency. All of our work is based on data, so all that data has to be reported by somebody. And we really do need people to know all about saferproducts.gov, which is our website for taking in public reports. We need everybody to know what it is and what it's for and how useful it is to society to have people telling us about the injuries that are occurring in their homes, specifically things like this, which is a hidden hazard. And Will mentioned it as a hidden hazard. It's a hazard that people in their daily lives don't really anticipate. You know, you wouldn't give your toddlers steak knives to play with. That's an obvious hazard, right? But the hidden hazards are the ones that after they happen, you say, oh, I should have thought that. But I never thought that would happen. And you can see that with furniture and appliance tip overs. It's a big, heavy object, and you just don't picture it tipping over in your head. And those little children grow up so fast, and they get heavier every day, and they get more, mobile every day. And these kinds of accidents sneak up on parents. That's perfectly normal, perfectly, what we expect to happen, but you're learning as you go along as a parent. And so we need to get the word out, and activities like this, outreach like this is imperative to get the discussion going across the nation about a hazard that new parents don't anticipate. They just don't see it coming. And it's also a very preventable injury. There are a lot of things you can do to make sure that your home is childproofed. And so this is a great opportunity for everybody to become a little more aware and think a little bit more about how they can spread the word about hidden hazards like furniture and appliance tip over. I also want to thank Janet for joining us. Janet, you've been a great advocate, and we very much appreciate at the agency, we very much appreciate your ability to help us spread this message and help prevent injuries in society. So thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, now we've heard a little introduction from each of the panelists. So I'm going to turn to questions. I'd encourage you again to put questions into the chat or the Q&A box, and we will get to those after we've had a little bit more fuller discussion of the issues. We can start to pull together a timeline of this issue, starting with deaths from as long as 20 years ago or even more. There were early attempts at legislation from some of the first families back in 2005 and 2007 that was not successful. We have all worked, everyone on this call here have worked to strengthen the voluntary standards, which has not been as successful as we would like. There have been lawsuits by parents who draw attention to the issue and also provide, some of the funding for many of us who continue to work on these issues. CPSC launched Anchor It, a very successful program to alert parents to the need to anchor their furniture, but as Will pointed out, that's a heavy burden too on parents to be responsible for making the furniture they buy actually safe to have in their homes. There have been recalls. Many of you may have heard about the IKEA recall, but there have been many other smaller recalls of additional furniture that tips way too easily under the weight of a toddler. We are all working together on the Sturdy Act, legislation that hopefully will put this issue in the past with a strong standard. And then again, all of us, CPSC, the organizations, individual parents, do as much outreach as we can so that people are aware of this hidden hazard and can take action. And I just have to ask, and maybe we'll get into this more, but why aren't we there yet? That's a lot of activity over all these years, a lot of parents' hard works, organizations, the agency. Jonathan, you mentioned that, consumers, and Will too, that it's a hidden hazard, but can you talk a little bit more with your, history and your experience as a human factors engineer and psychologist, like for people that don't know about the issue and might approach this, maybe they don't anchor their furniture, maybe they've heard about it. Is it simply that they think they can't protect their children against it, that it's kind of random, or that they think too concretely that maybe they can protect their child from furniture? What's your experience as you look at this issue in terms of parents in the home?
It's a great mixture of perceptions, but I think that in many of the incident reports that I've read in the past, it was simply not anticipated that the child was heavy enough or strong enough to be able to tip over whatever it was they were tipping over. In many cases, it's often a television, and in the past, actually, rates were much higher because we had very heavy cathode ray tube televisions, sometimes mounted atop of a dresser, which was kind of unstable, and if children could easily shake those down. And I think people just didn't anticipate it. For people who know about the hazard, I think there could be the possibility that someone would rationalize that they would be able to somehow teach the child not to climb or something like that. But I think that in this kind of a situation, you have to anticipate that children are going to be clever. Research and supervision of children in the home has been done by professors of child psychology. A friend in Canada named Barbara Morangello. Her research shows that, and she's done observational research of children in natural settings, right? They're observing the child in their natural habitat. And their research shows that children are regularly out of view, even though the parent is tangentially aware that they're somewhere in the house, but they're regularly out of view for many minutes of every day, especially the toddlers who are rambling about and have the run of the house, which is perfectly fine in most situations. But it's normal for parents to lose sight of their kids every day. That's normal behavior. And knowing that that's normal behavior, it's incumbent upon us to spread the message that childproofing is worth the time. And anchoring furniture, as we've got on our CPSC campaign, anchoring furniture, it takes a little time. It can be something you have to put thought into, but the peace of mind you get after that is well worth the investment of the time and money to put into it. I noticed someone in the chat said that they were interested in purchasing anchors and wanted to know about recommendations. Sadly, as a federal government worker, I'm not allowed to make any recommendations for any particular type or style of anchor, but perhaps Will could if he wants to.
Well, first I want to go back to what Jonathan, you were talking about when it comes to the research, and we know so much more today as the public than we did 1 year ago at this time. All thanks to the research done by CPSC staff and the research commissioned by CPSC staff into furniture tip over and into how it actually occurs and what the different forces are that a child can exert on a dresser or other clothing storage unit. The research that's been done is so valuable, and we all have benefited from it in terms of our knowledge about what's necessary in various standards. I also want to get to talk about anchors a little bit. Consumer Reports hasn't tested various anchors, so I'm not in a position either to say which anchor is better than another. However, what I can do is we have a great story and a great video about how to anchor your furniture, and I'll plug that right into the chat. Also, I can tell you a couple key things. First, find a stud. Make sure you anchor the unit into a stud. And second, if you have any doubt about the strength of an anchoring kit that you might be purchasing, might be best to, rather than buying something without seeing it, holding it, might be best to go in to a home improvement store and seek the advice of somebody there about anchoring furniture. Because this is not a time to rely on guesswork. It's a time to get the best possible information and use it.
Thanks, Will. Janet, I know Pat has said, let's finish our conversation about anchoring, because I think we want to get beyond that to a more permanent solution. But I know you might have something to say, and I also saw Charlie's House put some information in the chat as well about their work with anchors.
Yes, Parents Against Tipovers also doesn't endorse any particular anchor kits. We do, fully believe in anchoring furniture. We think that there are, unfortunately, so many units in people's homes today. We're talking, dressers, bureaus, chests of drawers that may not meet safety standards, the current safety standards, or, that safety standard changes over time. So if it was purchased even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it meets a different safety standard today if that's made. So we firmly believe that anchoring furniture is the best way to keep children safe, because I don't know what's in your home that is safe. And while we respect the message of anchoring furniture and we believe that it needs to be done, we really think the root of the problem is the safety standard of clothing storage units, because that's what needs to change. That's where the problem lies. We need that safety standard to be made stronger, and we need it to be made mandatory. Right now, it is weak and it is voluntary. So a company does not have to follow that standard in order to put their products out on the market, which comes as a huge surprise to consumers who thinks everything that they purchase is probably safe, especially here in the US, right? But I actually think a lot of manufacturers would agree with me that we need to make the safety standard mandatory. But I wanted to just say that, we have a parent in our group who lost a child to a dresser that meets today's safety standard, that's still being sold in stores today because it meets the standard. And as Will had just alluded, all of the work that the CPSC has done over the last several years, and the NPR that was just, recently issued in the last 6 months, that has pointed out just how woefully inadequate the safety standard is, that ASTM safety standard. So that's really, I guess, my viewpoint. Pat's viewpoint on anchoring is it is a Band-Aid to the problem. We support that it needs to happen, but the real problem is fixing the root, which is the safety standard.
Thanks, Janet. And even though Janet is an accidental advocate and someone who came to advocacy, she has picked up on our use of acronyms. So just to explain for people, the NPR is the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that the Consumer Product Safety Commission just announced, which would put in place a very stringent standard for furniture in the future, and is one of the avenues in which we may get to that future where we can assume that the furniture we bring into our house will not tip over under the weight of one of our children. Jonathan, is there anything you want to say from CPSC about the NPR? We can direct people to it as well.
Well, the NPR is posted on regulations.gov, but I can't really comment about it at all because we have an open rulemaking period right now. So comments can be submitted and will be reviewed on regulations.gov. That public website set up specifically for all the regulations the federal government puts out. And we also have other information on our website at cpsc.gov. I will mention that the standard has been working on the stability of furniture since at least 1998. There was an early ASTM standard called PS 110-98. And then the first version of 2057, which is the number for clothing storage unit standard, was put out in 2000, and it's been through several iterations since then. And even that 2000 version included a test for stability with a weight that was hung on the outside of a drawer to see if it would tip over. And that has been evolving over time with a lot of work from people in the industry and consumer advocates like Parents Against Tip Overs and staff from the CPSC. But it's a complex issue that they have to address in the forum that's built for public comment, and the input and the task group work and the debate and the discussion takes a long time. It's a process that doesn't happen overnight, and that all those different stakeholders combine together to come forward with a standard, and that takes a lot of time.
Thanks, Jonathan. I see that there's some great information being put in the chat too, so I direct people to take a look at that. And then let's move back to, as I said, the NPR is one avenue to come to a strong standard for furniture. KID, CR, the parents and Parents Against Tip Overs have all been working for years on another avenue, which is legislation, the Sturdy Act. Will, do you want to talk a little bit about that to start us off on discussing that possibility?
Sure. So the Sturdy Act is terrific legislation that's already passed the House of Representatives and is now before the U.S. Senate. And the legislation also passed the House of Representatives last Congress. Basically, what the Sturdy Act would do is it would establish federal stability standards for dressers and other clothing storage units. It would make sure that they are strong. It would make sure that they are done in a timely manner. It would give the CPSC, essentially, the CPSC lacks the ability typically to write rules, set rules, using the method that most other agencies can use. Instead, it has to go through an incredibly cumbersome process unique to the agency. In the case of furniture tip overs, we think, and we know a lot in Congress agree with us, that the agency should have this standard rulemaking authority, standard ability to go through the rulemaking process and set strong standards to prevent tip overs. And we think that's critically important for the agency to have, both so that it can get a strong rule in place in a timely manner, and also to make sure that if we get down the line and they need to be strengthened, they need to be revised, the agency can do that as well. The Sturdy Act also includes other provisions that are worth noting. The bill promotes safety innovation. It allows for new innovations to emerge and then become a part of the mandatory standard. So for instance, if there's some invention that comes out that allows, within a unit, that makes it less likely that unit is going to tip over, and the CPSC decides, hey, that's terrific, and it resists tip over, it helps ensure the stability of the unit, and keeps it at the same safety level that it would have been otherwise, then the CPSC can sign off on that and it can become part of the mandatory standard as well. That's great. And so those are a few different pieces of the bill. There are other specifics, but I think that's the right place to start.
Thanks a lot for that overview. And as I mentioned, we've all been working on this as a way. Similar legislation back in 2008 allowed us to start setting mandatory standards for juvenile products, cribs, strollers, high chairs, things that, again, the cumbersome process at CPSC had kept much progress in those areas until that legislation was passed, which is why we are very hopeful for the Sturdy Act. Janet, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about where it is now and the work the parents have been doing on it.
Yeah, so we parents have been for several years now working to reach out to our representatives in our own states, finding other stakeholders in states that would like to see the Sturdy Act pass as well, and really just sharing our story. It's incredibly eye-opening when you're working with a senator's office and they say, yeah, this is important, and then when you get a group of parents to tell their story chronologically. My child died in 2004. I thought she was going to be the last. My child died in 2007. I thought he was going to be the last. My child died in 2007 too. I thought she was the last. You go and you tell 14, 15 of these stories in a row, and the senators are like, what? I think there is such power in sharing our story, and I've never been a part of collaborative legislation before with I've never been part of legislation before at all because I didn't do any of this before, but as we've learned more about the process, I'm just starting to see what value there is in a parent speaking up when something tragic happens to them.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Just to more on this, in 2016, when KID first started to get much more invested in this issue, we worked together with Shane's Foundation. Lisa Seifert is also a member of PAT. Her son Shane died in the Chicago area, and conducted research on dressers and chests that were out on the market. At the time, we found that many of them didn't even meet the weak voluntary standard that we've talked about. And very few could stand up to more rigorous testing that we use that more accurately mimicked what happened in the real world when children interact with dressers. At the same time, we also worked with universities to ask students to redesign safer dressers, and we were amazed at some of the designs that students came up with. That didn't tip at all. You could not tip them because the way they had been designed to keep that center of gravity in such a way that a child's weight would not be able to tip them over. Can we talk a little bit about what role engineering and design play in safer furniture and how we can get companies to invest in that? Jonathan, do you want to start on that in terms of the engineering question?
Yes, well, in terms of safety, your primary goal is to eliminate a hazard if you can, if it's at all possible, and you can keep the product, whatever, and this is talking about any product, if you can keep it useful and eliminate its dangerous features, then that's your first choice. And if you can't do that, then you want to guard against it. And if you can't do that, then you might put a warning on it to just warn people to watch out for the hazard. But in this case, we're talking basically about center of gravity, right? You're changing the center of gravity of things that are mostly boxes. They're shaped like boxes. So to change the center of gravity, you can make the bottom heavier, make the bottom wider, make the top lighter, right? Or you can attach it to the wall or the floor. And that's going to do it for you. And so in terms of making things safer, it's totally possible. But you might end up with something that doesn't look like what you expect normal dressers to look like. And so there can be some fear that it won't survive in the market because it looks like if you make something pyramidal shaped that top part's lighter and the bottom's wider and heavier, and it's going to be much more stable. You can make furniture that won't tip over at all at 100 pounds if you make it a little bit slanted from the front to the back. And I've seen prototypes like that. I remember looking at the things that university students came up with in your test program as a really great ideas that they, I've also seen drawers that you can pull them out and they have little feet that drop down so that when the bottom drawer is out, it's acting as a stabilizer, right? And then you push it in and they retract. And I've also seen people thinking about making interlocks on the drawers so that when the drawers open, when one drawer is open, the other ones won't open. So you can't open them all at once, thereby changing the center of gravity more towards the front of the dresser. And there have been many clever ways of putting anchors on the back of furniture so that they're easy to anchor down. Anything that you can do that will either change the center of gravity of the box or make it easier on the consumer to anchor, and you're going to promote with the design of the product a safer environment for the children. And in many ways, these innovations are going to happen in the market naturally, but I think that the voluntary standard is trying to push along the science of changing the shape and design of the product so that all of the market adopts these ideas and all the market has their eye on the hazard. And all of the market is working together as one to decrease the likelihood that these things are going to tip over. And that's also the advantage of having a mandatory rule for a product like this. If you determine that they have a performance requirement that they have to meet, and everybody has to meet it on the market, then that's like a level playing field. There's not one competitor who's trying to skirt the recommendations and save a little money and make his product cheaper. So as a policy, I've always thought that, if I was going to be a manufacturer, I would want everybody to have the same rules, right? Because there's an advantage to knowing that we're all going to be working towards these injury prevention strategies in our manufacturing. There's a real benefit to the industry to have everybody required to do the same thing. So, that's a plug for mandatory rules. Voluntary standards can do the same thing too if they're widely adopted by the market.
Thanks, Jonathan. Anyone else want to add in on this conversation? Janet or Will?
Sure, I'll quickly say that Consumer Reports, through our testing of dressers, has found that it's both necessary to prevent injury and death for these units to better resist tipping over. And it's also feasible for them to do so. We found a number of units that we've tested that are already out there on the marketplace that can resist tipping over under a higher weight than is currently a part of the voluntary standard. And so it's very possible for the industry to strengthen how their units prevent tip overs. And I think that the great thing about performance standards is that they allow for flexibility. And so you have performance requirements that are out there that everybody has to meet. There's an even playing field across the marketplace. So you don't have to, compete against somebody who's just, hey, forget about this dresser stability thing. Even playing field. And then also it basically says, whatever you and your engineers can come up with to comply with this, great, do it. And the engineers that work for furniture companies are smart people. There's a lot of ingenuity. We know that from working together with them in the voluntary standards process. And so we really look forward to sort of having stronger performance requirements in place and unleashing that ingenuity.
Thanks.
The only other thing that I would add, and we're talking a lot about, dressers and changing the standard. I wanted to circle back to anchoring and why that's not a long-term solution. Just from a parent perspective, the average consumer might not know how to use power tools, and as Will had indicated, it has to be attached to a stud in the wall. Even dressers that come with brackets that can be attached to the wall, you know, studs are what, 16 inches apart. That might not even line up. So you might only have one attached to a stud and the other one attached into drywall. We've seen nanny cams of that tipping over onto children, you know. And not only that, but, you know, renters, there are not all states have laws. Actually, I'm not even sure of a lot of them that have laws that protect renters to anchor their furniture and still get their deposit back. I know when we bought Ted's dresser, I was renting. It was for my 8-year-old at the time. It sat on a hardwood floor. It seemed sturdy. I had seen anchor kits before, but I didn't really take it that seriously, as many Americans don't. And I thought I was fine. And fast forward till we put that in Ted, you know, fast forward 4 years, it was in Ted's room, a 2-year-old, not even 2-year-old's room, sat on carpet, you know, and I didn't even think to anchor it because I hadn't initially anchored it at first because we were renting at the time. And not only that, but all of the people that live in, you know, public housing or live in areas where they can't live there if they're going to put holes in the wall. So I just wanted to bring that up as a topic of why anchoring isn't the long-term solution and why I think it is so important that we are talking about the safety standard change.
Thanks, Janet. That is completely true. And just to finish up a little on anchoring, I see there's a question about floorboard or baseboard anchors. You can, if you do not have an anchor, you can also, if you're handy, and again, as Janet pointed out, it does require some skill. You can use an L bracket to do that, to attach it to the wall or the floor. You can also, if you can't use anchors, you can put shims under the front legs of your dresser that will just tilt it back enough to give you some additional security. But the long-term solution is really furniture that doesn't, again, tip over the weight of a tiny child who is so much smaller and so obviously going to be severely injured if it does tip over. I think I saw Charlie's house that talked about their resources for anchoring. So we do want everyone to anchor their furniture. So check out anchorit.gov to get more information. The video that Will mentioned that CR has on actually anchoring dressers, and also Charlie's house and other PAT resources as well. So just to move on now, let's talk a little bit about a little more about Sturdy. Where is it at right now? What can people do? You know, about this? And someone asked a question about bipartisanship. I don't think it's Sturdy's fault. It doesn't have bipartisan support. We're living in a very unbipartisan time right now, but just open that up to, in particular, Janet and Will to talk about anything else on Sturdy before we move on.
I wanted to just point out, we do have one Republican senator that is co-sponsoring Senator Cotton out of Arkansas. One of our families is Arkansas based, and he immediately jumped on board. And every time that we have had to reintroduce it, he is on board to support it. And I don't think that it is an issue of not having the support of a lot of Republicans. I think it's the issue of trying to get the right champions for that, you know, from the Republican perspective.
So yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled to say that the Sturdy Act does have bipartisan support. It was passed in the U.S. House of Representatives on a bipartisan voice vote, and now it's up to the Senate to follow suit. We do think that this is a nonpartisan bill, and it's about safety. You know, what's partisan about that? So we are encouraging every Senate office, every senator in the U.S. Senate to sign on, because this affects people nationwide, every single state. Children are at risk here. And so we are, I want to go back to something Janet mentioned, which was how this is a collaborative process at this point. You know, I think that we, you know, several of us have worked together a long time on the Sturdy Act. And something that's changed in recent months is that there is significantly more corporate support for the Sturdy Act than we've seen previously. That is so welcome to see. And we really appreciate seeing these companies that have decided, hey, this is the right thing to do. We need to pass this bill. And I've put a number of their names in the chat of those who've endorsed the bill. But I really think that those who have gone out there and said, this is the right thing to do, we need to pass this. That's what it truly means to show safety leadership. And we urge every other company out there that's in the furniture business to join us, because the more the merrier. And the broader coalition that we have in support of this bill, the likelihood is to pass.
Thanks, Will. Moving back to, now current time and some of the, I know that there are many both healthcare providers, people in injury prevention, families, a whole bunch of people on the webinar, and we so appreciate you joining us. Just some ideas from each of you in terms of what these different stakeholders can do. What can healthcare providers do to reduce the likelihood of tip overs? Let's start there.
Well, I'd be happy to say that you have to spread the word about this hidden hazard. And specifically, I mean, we've talked a lot about clothing storage units, but dressers and such, but televisions also need to be anchored. And televisions have been associated with a great many fatalities over the years. So make sure that everybody in the healthcare system is aware of this hidden hazard, and that they can put it into their preventive care. Ask about the child's environment if it comes up. Pediatricians are in the perfect position to spread the word about these hazards. And just pointing it out sometimes is all it takes, because when you're forewarned, you're forearmed. But you can also provide resources and links to your clients if you're in the healthcare industry that are available on our website. And Anchor It is a great resource. It has videos, it has posters, it has brochures, and just general information on the web. And if you can link to, it's free. It's federal government stuff. No reason not to use it, right? So link to it on your healthcare websites and help spread the word.
I was going to add to kind of to piggyback on what Jonathan just said. When I started first sharing Ted's story, that was actually one of the things that I left people with as a takeaway. One of the best things that we can do as parents, if I'm speaking to a MOPS group or a mom's group or wherever I'm speaking, let's talk about this, because the more we can talk about this, the more light we shed on it, and the more that it gets out of the darkness. And I think, I told my pediatrician about it. They have included it now in their handouts. That's one office in Minnesota. You can only do so much, but I think, having that message be out, and for us parents, knowing that you have a group of parents out here that are willing to share our story, that are willing to talk about it, connect with us, and let's see how we can help you too.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I think it's so important to have physical materials that parents can take home from a well-child visit. I know there is so much that needs to be covered in each of those visits, so to have something they can take with them to review later. But as you said, it's really the first step is to make sure everyone is aware of it. One of the things that KID has done with our safety messaging for physicians is providing small posters and things that can actually go into the rooms, into the exam rooms, because we know as parents, and now I'm a grandma, that you spend a lot of time sitting there waiting for the doctor to have time to come in. And so any visuals or anything that can be used in those settings at least alerts parents to the concern and gives them tools to protect their children. Will or Jonathan, anything else to add on that? And then we also, just as consumers, what can we do, both in terms of, we've talked a lot about anchoring, we've talked about outreach, what can individuals do to either support Sturdy, to learn more about the issue, and to have an impact in their own communities?
I can go first. So, Consumer Reports has a page up. The link was sent out where you can write your senators and let them know that you support the Sturdy Act. And so we encourage everybody to join us and do that. In addition, I'll say that another avenue that we've found is really helpful in getting the word out: local media, local news. there is so much more that people know about tip overs. People just know about it as an issue much more than before. And that includes reporters at local news stations. CR has B-roll that we provide, video that we can provide to local news stations. And just the more that the story can get out there through more and more outlets, all the better. Final thing I'll say on this is that I think it is everybody's responsibility to remember that, there's childproofing your home, and that anchoring your furniture and doing whatever else you can to prevent tip overs is a critical part of it. There might be older lists or older childproofing lists or older habits, frankly, that don't include anchoring on that list. It's got to be a part of it.
Thanks, Liz.
I just wanted to add, for everybody watching, I would challenge you after you leave today, just ask a few people, have you ever heard of tip overs before? You might be surprised how many people say, I had a piece of furniture fall on me when I was younger, or I knew someone that happened to. It's amazing how many stories come out of the woodwork when we start talking about it. And if you feel so inclined, I would greatly encourage you, as Will said, to contact the U.S. senators in your state to ask them to support this life-saving bill, because as Parents Against Tip Overs put in our Twitter chat, the Twitter chat a couple days ago, there is going to be a next victim coming. I don't know who it is. I promise you, and I hate to say this, I promise you that it will happen. And Pat will be there to support the family like we have continued to do year after year when more and more children are dying from this. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we have the power to change it if we can come together and change that safety standard. So I guess that's where I'll leave it.
And I'd like to add that interested consumers are welcome in voluntary standards activities. We never have enough consumer voices, and it's a requirement to have a kind of a balance between industry and consumers in any committee for any consumer product. And so if people are of a mind to spend some time volunteering, it can be a great way to be involved in something that's so important to society. And if anybody is interested in becoming a volunteer in a voluntary standards activity, please feel free to reach out to me. I can help you get connected with the voluntary standards groups for any consumer product, not just furniture, but anything. And so Consumer Ombudsman at cpsc.gov, send me an email and I'll help you along.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I want to go back to something you said, Janet, that I think, is so important to remember, and we'll actually, Jonathan, I may turn back to you for those new statistics that we talked about, but every near miss, every time someone does say, oh, I was shoving the laundry, back in the drawer and it started to tip and I pushed it back, probably didn't think another thing about it. Every child whose parent happens to be there and stop it, or even unfortunately, or fortunately, our children have very small rooms, so the number of stories we've heard where the furniture hits the bed before it hits the child, every one of those is no different from the deaths. It is an injury pattern that could have just as easily been fatal, and so we can talk about how the number of children who died or were injured, but the number of times it could have happened is so much larger, and that's why this is such a critical issue to address with a long-term solution. Do you want to give us an update from the CPSC data?
Right. So just by chance, the report for our annual report for furniture tip overs and television and furniture and appliance tip overs, everything in that report came out yesterday. And so Adam Suki, our epidemiologist, has summarized it briefly here. It's 20 years worth of data as far as fatalities are involved. And so we have 472 fatalities to children under the age of 18, 20 involving adults and 89 involving seniors ages 60 and over. So while this is primarily a children's issue, it's also a seniors issue. Very important to keep in mind. And the estimates for annual estimates, we have 17,900 visits to the emergency department per year, involving furniture, TV and furniture, or appliance and furniture combined. 3,700 visits to the emergency department per year from just a television, and 900 emergency department visits involving just an appliance. So you see it's spread out among those product categories, but this is an ongoing problem. Now, happily, the trending, you can see the graph on the report, the trending, the lines are going down, which is great. I mean, we love to see injury and incidences going down. But it's possible that that's just because of the retiring of these old heavy televisions. And it may be that when we're just looking just at furniture fatalities, that it's not trending down as fast as it would if we, divorce the analysis from the television tip overs. But this report goes into a breakdown of settings, also types of furniture, and even mentions racial indicators. Interestingly enough, in this, most of the injuries are white families and Black families, and there's fewer Hispanic families than you would suspect based on their proportion of the population. I don't have an explanation for that, but it's interesting. So we can put the link to this latest report in the chat, and anybody who's interested in learning more can consider reading that report. And also, I will put in a plug for that page on our website is full of reports. We have reports about not just furniture tip over, but all sorts of consumer product injuries. And if you're into the statistics, that's the place to go, cpsc.gov.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to thank our panelists, not only for the great information and conversation here today, but for the work you do every day on these issues. Thank Dr. Smith and his crew who've made this happen, and all of you who've listened in. Do any of our panelists want to make just a final closing remark before we go? No? Oh, Janet, yes, please.
I was just going to say, I don't want to say it's too late for our generation, but think about this issue for your children, for your children's children, for your children's children's children. And that's what we're working on, right? When my 2-year-old goes to pick out a dresser for her baby, I want her to feel fully confident that that's not going to fall and crush her child. And so I just want to leave that as a parting thought, that this is a large problem. It's not going to get solved tomorrow, but we just need to keep that steady drumbeat, as we always say.
And I would just like to thank everyone for the invitation. As a federal employee, I can say that we very much value and need input from the consumers in the world, and advocates are a special group. And so please, if you need something, or if you're concerned about something or confused about something, reach out to us. We want to hear from you. So my email is consumerombudsman@cpsc.gov, and I'm there to help you out.
Thank you to everyone for the opportunity to be here today. And we're really glad that you tuned in.
Thank you all. And I'll ask all the speakers to put their email into the chat now, which is going to be shared, so that you can reach out.